Well, this is actually a question which cropped up during this. We know that due to the blessings of God, Islam spread far and wide in the early days of Islam. What was the reason that other empires like Roman Empire or Greek empires also spread initially? You know, what was the sort of moral or something which was...
No, you are comparing two completely different values, incomparable values. You are comparing religious movement with empires. They are not comparable.
So that leads to the question then, you know, do you then need religion?
For instance, why don't you say Alexander the Great? Why don't you refer to him? That his conquest of almost half the world was so rapid that within a matter of years he conquered the half of the known world of that time. So why did Islam take that long? Or why did Christianity take much longer? I mean, they're not to be compared. They're completely different phenomena.
No, but for example, you know, the reason I picked the Roman Empire is the way it started. You know, the people who started it, or they must have some. They must have worked very hard for it. There must have been some sort of.
No, but the word Roman Empire in itself is so confusing and so differently to be interpreted at different era and different periods that you can't just mean anything by referring to Roman Empire as such in these comparisons. What was Roman Empire and at which stage of the history? Sometimes the Roman Empire was limited to Rome. Sometimes they were independent states, city-states. And they were supposed to be an empire, but that was not an empire at all. There were different states in certain geographical situations, areas, which varied. Sometimes it widened to other countries of Europe other than Italy, and sometimes it again contracted itself to a smaller area. And sometimes there were vassals to the Roman empires in the eastern regions of the contiguous area. And those vassals also had different attitudes at different times. With some so-called emperors, they were very respectful. With others, they wouldn't care a fig for what they wanted. And they were almost independent, only vassals in the name. So Roman Empire cannot be quoted against a religious phenomena, or any empire for that matter. They have completely different situations, values, conditions, and they're not principles like religions.
But why then were they given this great power? You know,
who was given what?
Well, for example, you know, when the Caesars were there.
No, why do you go back so many years before? Back into the history. Why don't you talk of America?
Well,
or Russia for that matter?
I could imagine that because, you know, eventually, because
while
of
here,
the early
in this time, while we are living now in this time, we have two big powers to quote, America and Russia. So base your question on them.
Well, perhaps the West, I could say, perhaps because of the sacrifices of the very early Christians,
now come to these empires, Russian Empire and American Empire. And now make your question clear with reference to these two powers. Then I'll answer it.
Yes. The Russians I can't think, but even perhaps America, as I said, you know, perhaps it is, sometimes, you know, you have that these sacrifices done by the earlier generations. The benefit is derived later on by later generations.
That is correct.
So perhaps what the West has got now is because of the very early sacrifices which were done by the early Christians.
Well, that is a different question altogether. I mean, it has nothing to do with this empire business at all.
That is actually why I asked for the Roman Empire, because perhaps I thought perhaps there
forget
was some
about the Roman
sacrifice.
Empire and things. If I take your question in the light of a reference in the Holy Quran to this phenomena, then I can answer it in a completely different perspective. But if you insist on comparing a political phenomena with a religious phenomena, then I would not answer to that question, because I don't consider that question to be valid at all. At least I can't understand this comparison. But in one way, of course, your question is valid, and this has been discussed referred to in the Holy Quran, though very, in a very oblique reference. The Holy Quran tells us that Hazrat Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, prayed to Allah to bestow on him and his people, in his followers in fact, the feast from heaven. A feast, heavenly feast should be bestowed upon them. That was Al-Ma'idah. Allah, in response to that, said that, of course, I'll accept that plea, because your followers are insisting that you must beg of Allah a feast from the heaven. So a feast will be given to you, but if you are not grateful, then also a feast which will not have the like of it. But if you are ungrateful, then I'll punish you in a manner as that manner of punishment will also be unique. It will be outstanding, and nothing of such a punishment would have ever been meted out to any other people on earth. So you will be unique both in the feast which I bestow on you, as well as in the punishment which will be given to you if you become ungrateful. Now this is a very important verse applying to the future of Christianity as a great temporal power. Because here the feast does not mean at all some cooked food dangling by a rope from the heaven and descending to Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, and his followers. This is not the sort of feast which is mentioned in the Holy Quran. It is a feast of worldly goods and worldly gains, of worldly wealth, and all the amenities of all the comforts of life. This is what in fact, sometimes Allah turns the prayer, slightly gives it a turn, and makes it much more meaningful. Perhaps what his followers wanted was a simple feast, food for one time. But for Allah it was just meaningless. It was just nothing. To ask a prophet for food for one or two times to descend from heaven, that was just ridiculous. So Allah gave it a turn. Allah said, well, I'll give you a feast which would last you for hundreds or thousands of years. A feast which would have no comparison in the world. You will excel in all worldly goods. You will have plenty to eat, and the best of the foods and the best of the fruits which man can ever have access to will be provided to you. So that is the feast in which you see the world today. Not only the Roman Empire again. It is a continuous feast. The West ever since is on the rise, materially, and in materialistic gains in every direction. But also Allah promised that if you be ungrateful, then the punishment which would be meted out to you would also be unique. And it will be a lesson for all times to come. So we are just entering that final phase. First two wars have shown us, have established the point that the Holy Quran has proved right, the process has started. They were given the very best of things, all the luxury of life which you can imagine was provided to them, and also this is established that they were ungrateful to Allah. So the First World War and the Second World War and now the third is in the offing. And according to this verse of the Holy Quran, it appears that as powers on earth, they will be wiped out. And they will be turned into parts of history for the followers to draw their lessons from, take their lessons from. So in this context, your question is valid. This can be compared with the religious values. Why they are so well off? Because a great prophet, a very humble but very great prophet of Allah, had prayed and that prayer was accepted by Allah. This is why they have got everything. This is one way of looking at it. And another completely different way of looking at it is this, that they are hardworking people, they apply their minds, they are turning all their attentions in this direction. And all their efforts are being spent in the worldly materialistic pursuits, so naturally they should be given the reward. This is also one way of looking at it. It's quite logical. And that also has been mentioned in the Holy Quran. This is the beauty of the book. That aspect has not been omitted by the Holy Quran at all. For some people who are spiritual, who believe in religious phenomena, the real reason is given in this verse which I have quoted. And for those who do not believe in religious phenomena, they want rational explanations, the Holy Quran tells us in Surah Al-Kahf, Alladhina dhalla sa'yuhum fil hayati dunya wa hum yahsabuna annahum yuhsinuna sunna. These are the people, the Christians are described of the latter days. Alladhina dhalla sa'yuhum fil hayati dunya. They have entirely devoted all their capabilities and qualities of head and heart to material pursuits, fil hayati dunya, pursuits of this world, such pursuits have nothing to do with the world to come, with good results, with fantastic results. وَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا. They are being rewarded constantly, so they begin to believe that they are spending their attentions in the right direction. They are being rewarded fully. And they are creating most wonderful things. Yuhsinuna sunna also means this. It may mean they are doing good deeds, and it may mean that they are producing wonderful things. They are creating wonderful things. The industrial nation. So all this has been prophesied, and this reason is also provided, because they are a people who are taking the world, this life on earth very seriously, and directing all their capabilities and powers in this single direction of the worldly gains, materialistic gains, so they will be rewarded. And this also is mentioned as a principle in the Holy Quran elsewhere, where Allah tells us that whoever wants hasanat dunya, we would provide him with that hasanat dunya. But then he will no share in the hasanat al-akhirah. The same principle. It was promised, again a promise, a religious promise. So all this is connected. An atheist can be fully satisfied by the second verse which I had quoted. Cause and effect. If you are exerting yourself in a certain direction, you must get the reward. This is quite natural. And an atheist would just see that surface and that is all. Another person, religious person, would see it as a phenomena. It's a promise of Allah that no effort would go unrewarded. So Allah has created this world in a manner that we are given rewards of our efforts. And thirdly, the religious people will be told by the Holy Quran that there is a much deeper reason, and the initial reason for all this, and that is a very humble prophet of Allah who apparently had no power on earth, no wealth, nothing with him of his own. Yet he prayed to Allah and Allah accepted it and told him that your prayer has been accepted, and these people would be converted into a very great people, materialistically. So great that you will not be able to find their equal on this earth as far as the goods of this world are concerned. The wealth and the food and the luxurious things, everything would be provided to them. This is the feast from heaven which was promised to Jesus Christ, peace be upon him.
Thank you.